Same old man. Game over. Johnny.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Why so serious?
Roll out.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Oh, welcome to this podcast review for December 8th, 2025, and I'm J.D. Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, for this conversation. Very much looking forward to getting into it. We do have a lovely guest joining us for this conversation, coming back onto the show. Good friend. We do love him, Isaiah Washington. Isaiah, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, it's good to be back. I'm glad that I'm here. It's been a while.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah. Yep, glad to be here. The last time you were on was for Sinners, all the way back in the spring. So it's great to have you back all these months later. And I do appreciate your patience and grace. I know you were supposed to join us a few weeks ago, but schedules as they are this time of year, it is quite crazy. So glad to have you here for this conversation on Noah Baumbach's latest. Before we get into it, though, Isaiah, tell me your relationship with Noah Baumbach. What do you think of him as a director?
I have been in love with Noah Baumbach's work as long as I can remember. I don't think he is a director that always has the Midas touch, if you will. There are some films that I would say are stronger than others, and I even take inspiration of him as a screenwriter. I do think that his writing efforts is a little bit stronger than his directorial efforts. Not to say that he's not a great director, but he is someone that I think it always just comes from the paper more so than the visual, like very big bombastic artistry that you would see from a technical nuts and bolts filmmaking perspective. Whether it's within his writing within something like Fantastic Mr. Fox, or even whenever he is the director chair for something like a Francis Ha, or even Marriage Story, which for me, I think is probably his magnum opus and his masterpiece.
Okay.
I've always been a very big Noah Baumbach fan, and this, even Jay Kelly, not necessarily my top 10 most anticipated of the year, but it was a strong honorable mention.
Yeah, I will overall agree that I think, and this is not to knock him as a filmmaker as far as a director is concerned. I do think he is a much stronger writer, which is ironically why his smaller films, such as Francis Ha and even the Meyerowitz stories, are probably my two favorite films that he has done. I'll actually go to bat for the Meyerowitz stories. I think that is his masterpiece. I think that is his best film, and arguably might be his most overwritten movie. So in a way, it also caters to his strengths, especially with regard to dialogue. And I think the movies of his that really focus on him as a dialogue researcher and observer, I think those are his best films for me. And even a movie like White Noise from, what was that, 2022, 2023, somewhere around that time frame. That's a pretty underrated movie. That's a movie where I feel like Noah Baumbach as a director was trying some new things. He was sort of challenging himself as a filmmaker, looking back on his own filmography and thinking, what can I do to challenge myself? Where can I get even more uncomfortable, if that makes sense? And I really admire that movie as sort of an attempt for him to try to grow as a director and emphasize some of those more artistic flourishes that I think he hasn't really done yet, but he's definitely trying to. And for reasons we'll talk about in just a moment, Jay Kelly seems to be a natural extension of that very thing as well. And we'll talk about whether that works or not. But I do think it's interesting to see this portion of his career where he's almost realizing that he has been more of a writer than anything else. And he's trying to challenge himself as a director specifically. And I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, I do agree with you guys that he is a great writer, and that is somewhat undeniable at this point. I think most people, at least if you're on his wavelength at all, will acknowledge that he is a strong writer. And that's not only evident in the films he's directed, but in those that he hasn't directed, but has had a hand in the screenplay. And there are several great examples there.
For sure.
I think he is quite underrated as a filmmaker. quite
okay.
underrated. And I think
Okay.
it simply comes down to that thing of how we attach ourselves to certain filmmakers because they are good at one thing. And therefore other elements of their filmmaking or of their craft gets overlooked. I feel like this happens with a lot of directors. You could certainly go down the list. But with Noah Baumbach, I think because we emphasize his writing so much that his technical skills as a director gets overlooked. Not to say that he's the next Spielberg or Martin Scorsese. I'm certainly not suggesting that at all. But when I look at something like Francis Ha and the black and white cinematography of that film, and that's one of those movies where we do think about
that's fair.
that film in terms of its cinematography. Or think about Mistress America and the score of that film, the energy, the tone of that film. It's incredibly kinetic and vibrant. It honestly probably has the best score of any film in a Noah Baumbach film. And I say that maybe a little myopically, knowing that I'm about to get to Marriage Story here in a moment. But I do think that is a film where he is experimenting tonally, and the score to that film, I think, is great evidence of that. The Meyerowitz stories, for all the reasons you talked about, Brendan,
Awesome
he is
movie.
not
Awesome
only
movie.
doing some great things from a writing perspective, but I think in terms of the camera, the aesthetics of that film, it's unlike anything we've seen with him before.
Yeah, that looks like a 70s movie.
It really does.
It kind of has that almost like late 70s Woody Allen kind of vibe in a way.
Yeah.
Which I like.
Which I love as well. And I'm with you, Isaiah. And I know that some people push back against this, and he's nominated, I believe he's nominated for the screenplay for Marriage Story. The movie overall is this big awards player that year. And of course, awards, sports, certainly going to foster a lot of conversation. So it gets a lot of pushback. But I do think that is a film that merits a lot of praise. I do think it is one of the very best films of 2019. But the thing with Marriage Story is it's not just one of his best written films, but where that film becomes his masterpiece for me is that it's the first time in his career where I do believe, and I will die on this hill. I know that I might be alone here. I'm willing to die by myself, but I do think Noah Baumbach, the director, meets Noah Baumbach, the writer, in terms of that talent. You look at what he does with the camera in that film and how it matches the emotional pathos of it. It is really fantastic. And it gets overlooked because of the bombacity of that film, the emotional peak, the conflict, and everyone wants to tweet about those things, the performances. And so often when people talk about that film, his direction, what he does with the camera, the editing, it gets so overlooked. But I think it's so good. And again, I'm willing to die on this hill. It was so good. I had him in my top 5 for director that year. Not just for writing and screenplay, but for director. I would argue it's one of the top 5 directorial efforts of that year. And a great year where there were a lot of incredible contenders for that category. But I really do believe that is his achievement as a director. And then following that up with this ambitious Netflix movie that's strange and weird in White Noise.
I love White Noise.
Which,
it's such
again,
a wild movie.
It's wild, and he takes these swings that are really great. Maybe they don't all land, but it's very different than something like Marriage Story or the Meyerowitz stories or even Mistress America or Francis Ha. Like it is him challenging himself, again, not just as a writer, but as a filmmaker. So I do think over the last 10 years or so, we have seen him challenge himself. He has done these new different things each time out. So while we do we appreciate, we look forward to the consistency of his writing, he's always bringing these new angles from a filmmaking perspective that just doesn't get talked about enough. Again, I'm not saying he's Spielberg, but he does more interesting things as a filmmaker than he gets credit for, especially Marriage Story, which I think, again, isn't just a masterpiece in writing. It is a masterstroke of filmmaking and editing and craft from that perspective as well.
I don't think you're wrong in that He is very much trying to invoke his films with new aesthetic identities with each movie, as if he's kind of playing with form and almost with genre. And you definitely sense that in Marriage Story as well. I actually will agree that I think from a directorial standpoint, he does some really good things in Marriage Story by lingering on certain character interactions. A lot of people like to always tweet about the argument scene, the legendary argument scene between Scarlett
Yeah.
Johansson and Adam Driver in that movie. But I'm always more fascinated about how he chooses to edit that scene that I think is very effective. Where Marriage Story fails for me from a directorial effort is when he tries to be a comedian. Because I think some of the moments of comedy in that movie are painfully unfunny. Some of the interactions with Scarlett Johansson's family, I don't think work at all. Like the whole knife gag, I think is painfully awkward. And some of those moments in that movie, I think is where, as a comedian, where he's trying to like basically work with comedic timing, I don't think that works. But I think when it works as a drama,
Yeah, to each their own. I very much disagree.
and that might
but
be
to each
that might
their
be a
own.
taste thing. Honestly, just might be a taste thing.
Yeah. I very much think all of that is handled quite diligently. But Noah Baumbach is not unfamiliar with comedy or levity in his movies. Obviously, that's a big part of his movies. And again, going back to tone management, and comedy is obviously quite subjective, so that will certainly linger differently from person to person. But The Squid and the Whale, another one of those that balances
that one.
drama and humor quite a lot. Francis Ha to a degree as well. Mistress America. Meyerowitz Stories, again, balances comedy and drama very well. Marriage Story is just the one that has the heftiest of drama, the one that's most bombastic in your face.
It's the most obvious from both of those angles. It's the most obvious drama,
Yeah.
but also the most obvious comedy when it's acting as that as well.
Yeah, and for me, that tone management never wavers. Like I was totally with it the whole way.
That's where we differ, I guess.
Isaiah, I don't know if you had anything to add to that.
I 100% agree with you, JD, about Marriage Story. I do get where Brendan is coming from a comedic perspective, especially with, and I'm blanking on her name. She's such a good character actress with the knife scene. Like her style of comedy doesn't work for everybody, and I could understand that POV. However, I co-sign from a technical perspective. Yes, we sound like a broken record. He's no Spielberg, he's no Scorsese, he's no PTA, but what he does well, he really does well. And what makes it fascinating is his films and narratives don't require that technical gravitas. It just doesn't. And I think that works for his favor in a lot of great ways.
He is a very interesting filmmaker, and I tend to like a lot of things that he does. So I was curious for Jay Kelly for a lot of reasons, aside from the Noah Baumbach of it all, as we'll get into, but was very curious for this film. So I think with all of that laid out, are you guys ready to into Jay Kelly here?
Let's do it, Jay. I mean, JD.
Okay. Jay Kelly is written and directed by one Noah Baumbach. It stars George Clooney, Adam Sandler, Laura Dern, Billy Crudup, Riley Keough, Grace Edwards, and a slew of other people that come and go throughout the film. I mean, it's kind of an extensive cast, and you'll recognize a lot of names here, but
there are
a lot of glorified cameos.
There are some people I didn't even know were in this when I started watching it.
Yeah, it's quite extensive. It's mostly the Clooney, Sandler, Dern show, and then at a certain point, it's just the Clooney and Sandler show.
Is it weird? Is it weird that I didn't even know Laura Dern was in this when I started watching it?
I mean, I didn't really do a whole lot of homework up front to begin with, so like I knew she was in it, obviously Clooney and Sandler, but so many of the people that come and go here, there was a lot of faces I did not anticipate, but I also did no homework ahead of time. So
yeah, I don't think I even watched a trailer for this one.
Yeah. So with that said, Jay Kelly, if you're not familiar with this movie. It is about the famous movie actor Jay Kelly, who embarks on a journey of self-discovery, confronting his past and present with his devoted manager Ron, poignant and humor-filled, pitched at the intersection of regrets and glories. Okay, let's jump into this. We'll start with you, Isaiah. What did you think about Jay Kelly?
Well, first, I also co-signed Brendan in terms of just the questioning of like how much did we know about this going in. I kind of did an experiment this year. I stayed away from all the trailers from this
Good for
movie.
you.
Yeah.
I didn't even read the synopsis. The same thing I did for one battle after another. Don't ask me how I did that.
Well
But
done.
it was dodging a bullet. I swear.
Yeah.
But with this, all I knew is that it involved George Clooney as a movie star, and Sandler was his manager. Written,
Yeah.
directed by Noah Baumbach, of course, co-writing by Emily. And I fell in love with this film. I think
Okay.
Jay Kelly is a very emotionally just cathartic film. Not necessarily for me because I'm literally a quarter century old. And with this type of storytelling, it's not something that would speak heavily for me to relate to. But I am surrounded by a lot of people in my life who would see themselves through this story. The idea of legacy, how far and how much are you willing to pursue the things that you are dreaming for, and what is the cost of it ultimately, and what is true success? Is true success seen from the people that share the same last name as you, or success seen
Hmm.
from the people that praise you and tell you how important you are? I think George Clooney is giving probably the best performance in years from his career, like even going farther than the Descendants, maybe since the days of Michael Clayton, I would say. Yes, I do understand how he's not doing that much here that we haven't seen before in terms of like stretching the boundaries of what he can do as an actor, but it's more so of the character and just the time capsule of that very meta movie star type of, I wouldn't necessarily say satire, but again, meta commentary that is trying to portray that only someone like a George Clooney would be able to display. Adam Sandler, I think, as his manager, Ron, is fabulous. Next to Punch Drunk Love, maybe the best performance of his career. I love how anti Adam Sandler he goes, because even within the best performances that you would see from Adam Sandler, he's very much doing a lot of the mannerisms that you would recognize, whether it's loud, very bravado, angry, even, or even very sporadic in terms of his like ticks. Here, it's a very nuanced performance of the very complicated nature of their relationship, because I don't know if I would call them, actually, yeah, I wouldn't call them best friends, but it's more of a one-sided relationship that is toxic, but also sympathetic because you understand where Ron is coming from. You understand that Jay Kelly, not a bad guy, not a horrible person, but a problematic, charming man who has his own
Hmm.
complexities and his own reasonings and thoughts of why he is the way he is. But
Sure.
Yeah.
Ron believes in that. He believes in something. So to conclude, I do have some minor gripes within the writing department and how this film is paced. I don't think it's as sharp as you would see within something like A Marriage Story, or as cohesive in something like a Francis Ha. But I do think that it is one of the better experiences that I've had with a Noah Baumbach picture.
Interesting.
Nice.
Okay. I'm I'm kind of struggling with this one. And I feel like the conversation we have here may eventually lead to how I feel about the movie as a whole, because I feel like I'm caught in this crossroads of how to view this movie. Do I view this as a Noah Baumbach film, or do I view it as kind of a George Clooney movie? Which is a weird way of saying that, because he's not even a producer on this thing. I could have sworn he would have been, just given the way that it's very self-reflective on George Clooney himself. I kind of would have expected that. If I choose to look at this as more of a vehicle for George Clooney specifically, I think this is quite good. And I like a lot of his performance here. You're right, Isaiah, that there is something more reserved and nuanced about his performance here. It isn't as outwardly challenging as maybe some of his other previous roles, but there's a bravery to be said to take on a role like this that is essentially yourself. And I don't think that's an accident. The movie is called Jay Kelly, which almost even sounds like the name George Clooney. Like, it has a pretty similar alliteration there. So I do think that is deliberate. If I choose to see this as a Noah Baumbach film, I have questions. At the very least, I have questions right now. I do think it's his breeziest movie, which is an interesting way to describe it. This is basically like if Frank Capra made 8.5. That's what this movie kind of feels like to me. It's going for a very old-fashioned kind of flair, which I love on paper. I think it's one of those movies where I love everything it represents. I love everything it's attempting to do, but I think I only love about half the execution, if that makes sense. And I think a lot of it mostly does come down to Noah Baumbach, the director, specifically. I love the angles that he's choosing to explore here, the way he's kind of creating a bit of a throwback movie in some ways. It kind of feels like an Amblin movie at the same time, too. For reasons I might get into later when we maybe talk a little bit further about some of the technical flourishes of this movie, while I often praise a director for going outside their comfort zone, sometimes they can veer so far out their comfort zone that the movie just looks like the director is uncomfortable. And I mostly got that vibe here from the majority of it as a directorial experience. But if I look at it as purely a George Clooney experience, if I look at it as purely a performative piece, there's a lot that this movie gets right. And I think those are the moments that are probably more interesting to talk about. And that's probably where we'll focus this conversation, because I do think those are the more intriguing elements that the movie is focusing on. And it also has a lot of individually great scenes, which I know we'll also talk about further. As a movie, as a directorial effort from Baumbach specifically, there are things about it that frustrated me. And I can get to those later as we go into this conversation.
Noah Baumbach is one of my guys. I'm sorry. I really responded to his meta take on career ambition and the personal costs along the way. This makes for a great double feature with Marriage Story in that regard. But with Jay Kelly, I deeply love how it balances the personal cost of ambition with this deep reverence for film and cinema. There's a lot to Jay and why he's having this lost in translation-esque midlife crisis that we see here. And part of it is born out of his addiction to cinema. He talks often early on, or even flashbacks to certain conversations he had with other artists about film and why he loves it so much. Something that is reinforced later on during the train sequence when all of these strangers praise him for his work, and he can see in real time the impact his career has had on real people. And I do love how Baumbach takes time to denote that, because it's real easy to look at our careers and scoff at or diminish our work because of guilt we may have as it relates to our families and our children. But with cinema, the art is often bigger than any individual artist. And I'd say that is very much the case for both Clooney and Baumbach. They both have incredible movies that will outlive them in the end, which is why that ending scene is really incredible. And I do want to talk about that more as
That's a good
here.
scene. Very good scene.
And I love that the film doesn't treat the art form as this evil thing on its own terms. But it is an industry that can and often does swallow up people. And that includes those who make it and those who don't make it. I love Timothy here, right, as representative of one side of that coin. It is
another great
he
scene.
is crucial to this film. He had all the talent in the world, but the system ate him up. And I agree, his scenes here are quite heartbreaking. Whereas for Jay, he becomes this huge star, but he had to make massive sacrifices in order to be as successful as he was. And those revelations are equally heartbreaking to me, even if we don't feel bad for Jay. And I don't blame anyone for seeing his privilege and scoffing at his newfound existentialism. But he is human, and humans have feelings, and he may be a huge star that is remarkably spoiled and drowning in luxury, but he still has to wrestle with the cost of his choices. And that's exactly what this film does. And again, I love the meta layers at work here, as you guys have been talking about. That final line from Jay, from George Clooney, was probably the least amount of acting he's ever had to do, and it makes for one of my favorite endings of the year.
Okay.
I do think this is Clooney's best work in 15 years. I think this is his best performance since Fantastic Mr. Fox, and honestly, I don't even think it's close. And that's not to
I think that's fair.
downplay his other work. He's always been a charming, fun actor on screen, but in terms of nuance and texture, I think this is quite easily his best since 2009. And again, I'm sure we'll talk more about why that is the case, but I think he does give some of his very, very best work here. And when you couple that with the Baumbach of it all, who I think is really great here. I don't think this is his best film by any stretch of the imagination. It's not quite up there with Marriage Story, but I do think there's a lot going on here. And again, those meta contextual elements, it adds so much new and different, interesting to this film that I was quite compelled by.
I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of those meta qualities, a lot of that is because of how good George Clooney is. And he's very much aware of that. And this is why I love his performance as well. And I called it brave earlier, because he is, if you want to say he's playing a version of himself and you try to use that as a knock to say he's not really doing some challenging work, I feel like that's a criticism that's kind of missing the point of the movie in a lot of ways. Because I do think there is a lot of bravery to be had about someone that's willing to look at their own career and manifest a character out of it and use it as a way, as a therapeutic way of what they regret because of this particular industry and how it's structured and how it functions. There's a scorcher of a line. And I'm going to paraphrase it here, and I'm only going to say it once because, JD, I assume it's one of those lines that you're going to want to talk about. I don't want to steal your thunder, but it involves how to be a successful parent. And the best way to do that is by making yourself irrelevant, which is one of the hardest things I've heard all year from any movie. It is a difficult thing to hear and difficult thing to bear. But what I love so much about that line is not just how truthful that it may or may not be, but it proves that Jay Kelly is one of those movies that also does a great job being able to have its cake and eat it too, because it doesn't necessarily condemn the artistry of filmmaking or acting specifically, but it also doesn't 100% condone it either. It's able to find this kind of middle space between the artfulness that should be celebrated, but also recognizing the sacrifices that you make along the way. And sometimes you lose touch of those things, and that is painful. And that is a very painful thing. And the movie is aware of both of those angles and tries to find this middle space in between them, which is a hard thread to balance. And I think if anything, it's really George Clooney's performance that is, I mean, there's a lot of people here doing a lot of that work to make that happen, but George Clooney's performance, I think, is the key thing that is making that most work here. At least it did for me. I think it's a very understanding performance in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think in a lot of ways, Baumbach is asking him to give a George Clooney performance, because then the film goes on to deconstruct that as it examines, again, those costs for Jay and the choices that he makes. We find out early on he has 2 daughters, and he wasn't always there for them because of his career. So much of what we see in this film is him attempting to make amends to both of them. In fact, the whole second act is a result of Jay impulsively following Grace to Europe and thus taking everyone with him before they finally find her on this train, where we spend a good chunk of this movie. And yet, despite those extreme lengths, he's more or less unsuccessful in his attempt to remedy that emotional gap with Grace. And his attempts to reach his oldest daughter, Jessica, they are even more dubious. But it clearly does matter to him. His decisions might be brash, but they are an attempt to remedy that emotional gap that he's feeling. And what's interesting about Baumbach's writing here is that he's navigating this polarity of choosing between career and family. On one hand, the film might be suggesting that you don't have to choose, that you can be a successful actor and be there for your family, which is why I think Ben Alcock, played by Patrick Wilson, is important here.
I like him here a lot. Yeah, I really do.
I do a lot as well. But simultaneously, Ben is second fiddle to Jay. He's only getting this tribute because Jay initially turned it down. And it's clear that Ron, being his agent, Ron prioritizes Jay over Ben, which leads to a funny little moment near the end of the film. So it's equally proposing that trying to do both has a ceiling. And it really just depends on how far you're willing to let your ambitions take you. And that is why I think the phone call scene he has with Jessica is maybe my favorite scene of the film, because it's presumably the only time of Jay's life where he is forced to be honest with himself and really cut through the bullshit. The whole time he tries to dance around it, but she flatly calls him out and wants a moment of transparency. And once he reaches her on that level, he openly admits that being a huge star in his career was more important to him than being a father to his two little girls when they were little. And that choice had consequences, ramifications that are not remedied by the end of this film, which is why that ending is a killer to me. Those final moments, the flashback that we see, the image of the two little girls cut to that final phrase from Jay, which I won't reveal here. Maybe we can get into spoilers, but since I haven't really given a spoiler alert, I won't give it away quite yet. But that final phrase, and you couple that with the performance from Clooney, to your point earlier. So this is a film that where Jay Kelly has to have that George Clooney performative ethos that we all love about him, but he's been criticized forever for having. This film wants to deconstruct that because ultimately it wants to say maybe it wasn't good enough. Not just in terms of what's on the camera, but more importantly, behind the camera, off screen. And having a second opportunity at that killed me. Absolutely killed me. Like that particular moment is arguably one of Clooney's top 5 moments of individual acting. It's brilliant.
I don't disagree with that.
His casting here was nothing short of sublime.
It's very good casting.
Yeah.
No, I definitely agree. And like I said, like there are areas in the script that we'll probably talk about later that didn't completely work for me in terms of some of the subplots. But where I think Noah Baumbach and Emily Mortimer gets it incredibly right is the dichotomy of that it's not necessarily binary. It's saying that you can have both. And I don't think that it's necessarily trying to, like I heard someone say, it could have been Brendan, have your cake and eat it too. I'm careful of saying that because I don't want that. I'm not saying that that's what you're implying, but I don't want it to come off as if it's cheap, lazy writing, because I think it does do a great job at deconstructing that psychology of what he was presented with him. Because we got to remember, he kind of didn't even want this in the first place. When you're seeing the flashbacks of how it all started and where him and Timothy were, like he was seen as someone that was more of, you're not really a great actor. You're more of a movie star, which has been more of a heavily back and forth for years within some other actors that we can name, such as someone like a Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt, or even when you go back to the days of someone like a Sean Connery, if you were to go to the classic eras of cinema.
Sure.
Here, it refuses to be black and white, which I appreciate because I'm telling you, 20 to 25 years ago, in the mid to early 2000s, this film would have wrapped up that ending in a beautiful, perfect, studio friendly bow where he does have the reconciliation, where
Yeah.
he does have the affirmation of his peers that eventually kind of are spread thin, not to go too deep into spoilers, but he does find himself more and more spread thin in terms of the people that affirm him or that backs him up here, where he has to really look back into his life and really come to terms. Am I narcissistic? Was it all worth it? Is it something that did do great unto other people? As there are people in that tribute who are there to support him, but not necessarily the people that he's known or lost or gained along the way before his trip to Europe. So I definitely think that was something on the stronger side that I appreciate.
Yeah.
Baumbach and Mortimer refuses to pick a side.
Sure. Yeah. And what I like about that too is that the ending does still have a bit of a bitterness in a way, which I do
Yeah.
think is appropriate. And it further proves why someone like a George Clooney is the only type of actor to play a character like this, because there is this. It's not just the character of Jay Kelly and his recognition that maybe he got where he was simply because he was at a young age more interested in the stardom of this profession as opposed
Yeah.
to the skills or the art of this profession. And now he's at an age where he is beginning to recognize that unfortunate flaw. But from a meta angle as well, George Clooney himself was sort of seen as like this unbreakable Hollywood star for a lot of his
Yeah.
career. And this is maybe the first time I feel like I've ever seen him star in a movie where they make it very clear that he is no longer a young man. And I mean, he's been in he's in his mid 60s, if I'm not mistaken now. He was born in 1961. But even when he was starring in movies in the 2010s, I felt like Hollywood is making an effort to say, hey, this is still the same good looking man that you knew from the 90s and the 2000s. And
Yeah.
here we finally have a movie where he is absolutely showing his age. And they talk about that. And I appreciate when a big movie like this can sort of tackle uh the stereotype of that Hollywood figure almost as this unfortunate hero of Hollywood in a way, and showcase them as actually they are pretty breakable. They are still people like us. It's kind of similar to how when we saw
Yeah.
a movie like Top Gun Maverick, and we actually saw for the first time how short Tom Cruise actually is when he was standing up next to all of his training
Yeah.
mates there. Like I
Yeah.
do appreciate that, and I think doing that here for George Clooney specifically, and the fact that a character like Jay Kelly has this recognition of maybe I was in this for the wrong reasons when I started this out. Like, I love that the film holds on to at least a little bit of that bitterness by the end. That is a bold move for this
Yeah.
movie.
I agree. I think it's important that at the end of this film, while he's not alone, it's as close that he's been alone probably his entire life, or certainly in
Yeah.
his career for sure. And as far as him aging, I think that's interesting because it does spiral him into this existential crisis of sorts.
Yeah.
As we hear early on, one of his colleagues has recently passed away. So there's a funeral scene that he is forced to go to. And then as we veer away from that, he just keeps reminiscing on his time in the movies. There's that line that I'm sure will be on 1,000 t-shirts you'll see out there as far as his memories are movies. And it is
Yeah.
a great t-shirt. It is a great line to put on a t-shirt for sure. But that is a lot of how this plays out as he's reflecting back on his career, which that is going to be the human response when you're going to an event where they are reflecting on your career. So it's understandable that he has that visceral reaction. But I do love how it's coupled with not just him reflecting back on his career, but again, those costs as it relates to his two daughters, how it ties into that urgency of this is the last opportunity I may ever get to have with Grace before she goes off to live her life. I've already failed in that regard with Jessica. Maybe I can reconnect with Grace on some level. Obviously, that doesn't go very well. And as I noted earlier, that phone call scene with Jessica is even more dubious. And at the end of this film, he doesn't really have much to show for his life outside of his career, which again, that isn't nothing. That's going to linger on way after he's left this earth. But he does have to wrestle with that choice of I wanted to be a star. I got to where I wanted to be. And again, I think that's what's so interesting about the questions this film is provoking as far as having your cake and eat it too. I really don't think the film is suggesting that you can be this huge movie star in a George Clooney kind of way and be there for your family. I really don't think that's what the film is suggesting. Now, I think it is doing that through the Ben character, but as I noted, I think the film goes out of its way to denote that Ben isn't the star that Jay is. He's not. He's successful, obviously.
He's
not
able to find that balance because he hasn't
able to
reached
find that
level
balance
of stardom.
Yes.
So in a way, it's kind of interesting that now we finally see a man like Jay, who had this stardom, begin to envy a man like Ben.
Yes.
Yeah,
exactly. And he wishes that maybe he wasn't as huge of a star and was able to have the family along the way. And again, that's what's so great about that final shot and that phrase from Clooney as Jay and the emotional layers at play there, and perhaps the meta layers as well, which I just find utterly captivating. I just think as far as how this film wrestles with movie stardom and that emotional side, I think it's quite brilliant. I love it.
But even when you look at the Ben Alcott character, which I find okay, let's just pause for a second. Am I the only one who actually found that to be very similar to Ben Affleck? Was that intentional?
Oh yeah, I think that's part of the joke. I think
I love it.
Well, again, like I mentioned earlier, a name like Jay Kelly does sort of have a similar alliteration. It kind of rolls off the tongue in a similar way as George Clooney, Jay Kelly, George Clooney. So then it kind of sets you up to think that okay, Ben Alcott might be played by Ben Affleck. No, he's played by the guy from the Conjuring movies. So I love in a way I love that you pick an actor that kind of is maybe like Patrick Wilson himself is maybe at the actual same level that his character of Ben Alcott is. So I kind of love
that B tier in a way.
Yeah. And again, kudos to Patrick Wilson for maybe being aware of that and saying, yeah, okay, I recognize I'm not at the level of George Clooney.
I'm not
so
Clooney.
I'll play this. I'll play this character.
He's not Clooney. No, he ain't Clooney. But even with then, Baumbach, he shows that again, that dichotomy. But even Baumbach is bold enough to not say, well, to really say his is not perfect either, because it could be easily like interpreted that, oh, his character is actually the one that he always wish he could be. But sometimes the thing that we envy, as Ron said, Ben is no saint. Like he got married again, and it was this time was the maid, which of course you would cast Elsa Fisher as the maid wife now, which I thought was really good. But it also showcases in the way how Ben treats someone like a Ron, who is a manager, and the way how he speaks about him behind his back versus in front of him. It just shows that there's a problematic nature, that temptation of pride that can always sneak in, or just like that bitterness and how you would be able to treat like one's manager who is always behind the scenes, no one who ever is known as a household name. That can always slip in. So whether Jay were to choose this life or not, or even how he would choose this direction for his career, he was always going to find himself tested with something that would be problematic that he would reflect on. In his case, it's a little bit worse, sure. Like if you were to compare the lesser of the two evils, or like pick your poison, if you will, but he was always going to find himself running into something like this.
What did you guys think about Sandler's performance here? Do you guys have any specific thoughts on that?
I think he has. I'll just say I understand why this is the performance that's finally starting to get him some potential awards love, unlike before where he seemed to miss his opportunities with movies like Punch Drunk Love or Uncut Gems, because I think he has a very specific moment in this movie that people are latching onto, and it might be among the best moments of any Adam Sandler performance I've ever seen.
The one at the end.
Yeah, the one at the end.
Yeah.
I do think that is terrific.
Yeah. See,
Yeah,
I'll let you finish. Go ahead.
but I think that's the thing that is going to sell this performance, because when I look at his filmography as a quote unquote serious actor, when he's not doing Adam Sandler comedy specifically,
Yeah.
I do like his performance more in Uncut Gems. I do also like it more in Punch Drunk Love. I actually like his work in the Meyerowitz stories more than this one. I think they're more rounded performances. They cover the gambit more, but I think this maybe has his most defining moment, defining monologue, if you will. So I can understand why people are going to cite this one, especially when we look back on his entire filmography. I get that.
Yeah, that's what's interesting. And it seems like we're in parallel as far as Sandler is concerned, because throughout a lot of the film, he is good. He's more than serviceable for this character. But in the back of my mind was like, my mind was running in terms of awards. It didn't seem like an awards type of performance throughout much of it.
It felt like,
And
it's like,
then
okay,
you
we
get-
finally have this movie where we can finally honor him. Let's just play the game. It almost felt like that for much
it
of
did feel a little tame, but then you get to those final 15 minutes. And I will say, aside from the final gesture of the film, the two other moments that I do really love here, and again, it circles back to what I love about performance in terms of subtlety. And it's also anti Adam Sandler ethos as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's two other moments that I really love. It's when he's in the taxi, Jay is running him down. He pauses, again, doesn't say anything. The camera just lingers on him as he's contemplating, do I get out of this taxi? And I love that choice from Baumbach. And I love what Sandler is doing, because he's able to convey so much without saying literally anything in that moment as he's wrestling, do I get out of this taxi? Then he gets out and he utters, I think, a single phrase to him. They have a brief exchange about how Ron is the only one left. But mostly it's this quiet, subtle, tender moment between those two where Ron has to wrestle with, do I stay or do I go? And I do think what Sandler conveys there is really powerful in a subtle kind of way. And then the very next image we see of him is Ron putting the makeup on Jay, again in this quiet, almost brotherly, tenderly way that I do think it's intimate in this really poignant way that I do really love. And so I think those two moments are also great. Again, it's anti-Sandler. It's very internalized for the most part, those two scenes. And then that gesture you're talking about at the end, that was the kicker that really put over. I didn't anticipate it, to be perfectly honest. So it's one of those moments where the movie is slowly bubbling. I don't think this film is overly cathartic at all, even when we get to the montage, and maybe we can talk about that too. I was moved by the montage, but not in an overly cathartic way. It really wasn't until that Sandler moment, that gesture toward Jay, that is what really pushed me over the edge emotionally. And so I agree with you. That is certainly like a top 5 Sandler moment for sure. But it really isn't up until the taxi scene. I was a little unsure of the awards worthiness of it, even though it was good. It was good. Don't get me wrong, but
It was
wasn't
good,
sure if it was awards worthy.
I did like his dynamic with Laura Dern. The history that they seemed to share, I thought was
that was
pretty
great.
revealing. I actually think there's a pretty interesting story to tell regarding their relationship, about the quote unquote underbelly of celebrity and those that actually work for celebrity but never make it past the status of celebrity. I actually think that's a pretty interesting position to find yourself in. I think there's a neat story to be mined out of that. But even in those moments, I was thinking, man, like, is Laura Dern out acting Adam Sandler, and Sandler's the one that's getting all the awards love here? I was kind of feeling that a little bit, but that's not to say Sandler was bad in those moments. But I was like
Yeah,
you,
no,
Judy.
yeah.
I was constantly thinking, I think he's more effective in the Meyerowitz stories. I think he's more effective in Hustle, that Netflix basketball movie, as well. And then we get to those scenes at the end. It's like, okay, I think I get it now. I
Yeah,
think I
it
can. I think I
really
can
are
understand the
those
narrative.
3 moments for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think he's fine. Like, I don't think Laura Dern is necessarily acting circles around him. I don't think she's awards worthy either. And she, like, the difference is Dern hasn't been in those conversations, but Sandler
Right.
has.
That's the thing.
And I
Yeah,
think
sports
that's
of it all.
what shapes, that shapes that perspective and that dialogue. But yeah, you get to those final 15 minutes or so, and that's where you start to understand why
Yeah.
Sandler is having that. And look, I think if he does end up getting the Oscar nomination for this film, just for those final 15 minutes alone, I can certainly appreciate it. But I might also pretend that it's a little bit of a makeup for those other 3 that you mentioned earlier.
That is very interesting to hear this because I am somewhat the exact opposite. I will
Okay.
admit the first act, I was the same way as you guys in the first act where I'm like, he's good, but something's missing. Okay, let him cook for a little bit. We still got like a whole hour and 50 minutes left of this film.
Mhm.
And it was the moment where I think what really made me think, okay, yeah, we're going into like one of the best of his career territory. Is really the party sequence um,
Hmm.
before he
Yeah,
finds himself
sure.
like alone. I love it when he's wrestling with that morality of should I stay or should I go? Because you could tell he's very torn between, dude, I have like invested my life, I invested so much of my
Yeah.
time, like my family, because Ron's a very big family man too, but he has to drop everything that he's doing because Jay Kelly has this or Jay Kelly has
Yeah.
that. And constantly on the phone, constantly making time between him and his son, FaceTiming on a train where he probably should be scheduling
Yeah.
something for Jay Kelly's lunch.
And,
And
Sure.
and can I speak to that
it's
just
just
real fast?
yeah, go ahead, go
Real
ahead. Yeah,
fast.
yeah.
I think what's interesting because we've talked a lot about Jay Kelly, but you make up a great point that in this film, Ron's kids are younger. So
Hmm.
he does find himself at a crossroads where he can either be at home more, and him and Laura Dern's character do have, like, when she says her goodbye, she tells him, "You need to go home. You need to go home." But because he's so devoted to
Yeah.
Jay, and his career is essentially Jay Kelly, they talk about that. He's like, "I'm also Jay Kelly."
Yeah.
So he,
He's a
like,
business. You have to treat it like a business corporation.
absolutely.
You have to.
And because he is also Jay Kelly, if Jay Kelly has failed at the family and career thing, you have to assume that Ron is also failing that test. So it's
Hmm.
interesting, like, to your point, which I'm glad you bring up.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Like, it puts Ron at a crossroads where he can make a choice here. I can go home, or I can continue down the Jay Kelly path, and maybe I also fail. Like, he's also going to have this same existential crisis in another 20 years when his kids grow up and he realizes, I've missed all of this because I've been chasing Jay Kelly around the globe. So, like, that's an interesting, like, side effect here with Ron that is fascinating. And you're right, it culminates in that, like, that party sequence, which
Yeah.
is really good.
How
So
how Jay's
But
life
even
bleeds into
then,
their life just because they work for him. That's a very
yeah,
good observation.
yeah, great point.
but
Yeah,
even then with Ron, it still feels night and day compared to Jay Kelly because you see him making the effort, because you see him with his family. I
Sure.
gotta
yeah,
admit, and this is where some of my critiques come in. Just bear with me here. I wasn't really a big fan of the casting for his wife, Greta Gerwig. That kind of felt a little bit out of
Oh,
touch and
I
tone
have
for
thoughts.
me
I
a
have
little
thoughts.
bit, as well with Laura Dern. Now, I'm not going to say Laura Dern was necessarily miscast, but I would be the opposite, where I actually think Sandler was picking up a lot where she lacked. Not because she's not giving a good performance or not because she's not
Interesting.
trying, but I'm not a fan of the writing of her character. I'm kind of mixed with it. There are areas where I
Interesting.
like that she has this very not nihilistic, very pessimistic viewpoint of what she does for her job. She's the type of coworker where like she swears that she's going to quit. 10 years later, she's still there, and I do get that side of how the pressures of the job and what does she have much on her own that is out. Like when she leaves early
I was
in
gonna
the film,
say you could argue she does quit. Like she literally leaves.
you can argue she does quit, but when Ron
finally
says,
had enough.
like what, but when Ron says what is ever gone, or like something on the level of like, is she gone? Like what is gone at this point? She'll probably be back on Monday, still taking calls, still checking text messages for someone like Jay Kelly. But I was not a fan of the writing of her character, more so because it felt like the film was biting off more than it can chew with her character, especially with the love relationship that she had with Ron, which felt so out of touch for me and so tacked on, where it adds more to the runtime. It feels not as cohesive. I think her character was just a little bit underdeveloped and undercooked, and it's requiring something of Laura Dern and trying to like recapture the magic of what we've seen from her previously in something like Marriage Story or Big Little Lies, those type of performances that has kind of felt a little typecast at this point. But that's just my perspective on it.
Sure. Yeah, and I didn't necessarily mind it, and I think primarily because the dynamic that Ron and Liz share in each of their moments, those moments felt very Noah Baumbach to me, because I think he does tend to veer into some of those side tangents between character interactions every now and then, and the way that they talk to each other feel very much in line with something like the Meyerowitz stories and some of those other even smaller Baumbach films that might be up for comparison for those particular scenes. I do want to speak to the Greta Gerwig casting as Sandler's wife, because I think where I will defend it is, and I don't know if this was intentional, but I just find it really funny because Adam Sandler, he is known when he is in many of his broad comedies, he likes to bring his family involved in some way. And even in a movie like Happy Gilmore 2, his daughters were in that movie. His wife was in that movie. And here in Jay Kelly, you have one of Sandler's actual daughters playing tennis with him, but instead of Sandler's wife, it's Noah Baumbach's wife playing the wife. Like that had to have been an intentional gag, because in a way, those sequences of Sandler with his family kind of feel like, what if Noah Baumbach actually made a broad Adam Sandler comedy? Like it kind of has that kind of energy to it, but instead of bringing Sandler's wife, he brings his own wife into it. So it almost feels like just an addition of the whole meta exercise that this movie essentially is, even though it's not connected to Jay Kelly himself and George Clooney specifically. It weirdly feels in keeping for me. But I understand the distraction because Greta Gerwig has such a strong personality that it's sometimes very hard to overlook that. And you find yourself just seeing Greta specifically and not whatever character that she's playing, especially when she only has a few small scenes. But I like the idea of it.
Well, and you got to wonder how close this is for Baumbach as well. I mean, we've talked a lot about how meta this is for Clooney, but for Baumbach himself as a filmmaker who also was going to wrestle with these things. Now, in a different way, obviously. He's not a movie star like Clooney is, but he's in the industry and he still has to grapple with the work that he's doing and his own 3 kids that he has as well, and his life with Greta Gerwig, as we all know and love and cherish. So to some degree, this is as meta for him as it is for Clooney. And I'm sure that was a big part of why he cast someone like Gerwig in that role. I certainly didn't mind it at all, as distracting, I guess, as it could be, but maybe that's just because I love Greta Gerwig. And we've talked so much about her as a director these days that you almost forget how charming and lovable she is on screen as well. And it was a great reminder, as brief as her role is here. Maybe that's another reason I wasn't as distracted. But I do understand it. And I guess if I'm going to play devil's advocate, I could understand this cast at large and how distracting it could be with these glorified cameos, because it's not just Greta Gerwig. Isla Fisher shows up for half a second in this movie.
I know.
Like Emily Mortimer.
I barely recognized it.
Yeah, like Emily Mortimer as Jay's hairstylist has maybe 2 scenes. like
Yeah.
like it's like real brief. So like there are a lot of familiar faces. Jim Broadbent has one scene early on in the film as well. So like there's just a lot of people that you'll recognize that just kind of come and go throughout this film. So I think it's just one of those things you have to accept.
It's a movie about movies. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a movie about movies, and it wants to have movie stars in it. And you know, who doesn't want to work with Baumbach? Like, look, at the end of the day, I was never distracted by any of those things, but I could see how some people might be.
There were other things, that did distract me. I haven't gotten to them yet, but maybe I'll save that for a later part of this conversation as we wind things down here. But those specific things around the Hollywood isms that this movie's going for, I guess knowing that this is a movie about a movie star, played by a movie star, who knows that he's playing a movie star that is about his own movie stardom. I kind of expect and prepare myself for that type of cameo exercise. Like I was ready for that. There are a few other things I'll talk about later that did distract me, but for the wrong reasons.
Yeah. I mean, the film makes no bones about it. The opening scene of this film is a one-take shot of Jay doing the final scene of this movie.
Yeah.
So they're on a Hollywood set. You see the production of it all, and all of these characters, like every character we just named, it like comes in and out of the frame during this one take shot.
Yeah.
So like it is a movie about movies, and it does that as brazenly as possible at the beginning of this film.
And as far as I understand it, a lot of those individuals are played by either real life filmmakers behind the camera, just real life tacticians behind the camera, or they're the real people working on this movie.
Really both in a lot of ways. Like Linus Sandgren, who is the cinematographer here, was the director of that movie in the opening shot.
Yeah.
So they're double dipping.
Baumbach himself has a cameo in this movie.
Yeah, but exactly. Yes. So it is absolutely a movie about movies. And again, that's why I go back to, something we said earlier, kind of veering back into the nuances of this movie. Like the Jay Timothy dynamic at play, I think is really quite incredible. And again, to your point earlier, Isaiah, about this film offering this incredible gray area, it doesn't shy away from conflict. And I love that dynamic because those flashback scenes and what they offer, at least how one can choose to interpret them, did Jay perhaps steal Timothy's life as an actor? On one hand, you could say yes, because he follows him to the audition, does the audition, gets the role. But on the other end of that token, and again, I love that Baumbach shows us this, because what we see in that audition is that the moment was too big for Timothy.
Timothy was not going to get the role. Yeah, he was not going to get that job.
Reminded me a lot of Michigan playing Ohio State last weekend. Moment was too big. They weren't good enough.
They weren't going to get it. Timothy was not going to get it.
He was not going to get that role, even if Jay wasn't there. And so it does circle back to
cooked either way.
Jay Kelly had the talent. He goes to the audition. The moment isn't too big for him. He performs very well. He gets the role. So, I mean, I think there's a great argument that Timothy, while bitter, it's understandable that he's bitter, but Jay didn't really steal anything. But I love those emotional complexities there. I love Jay wrestling with, but not necessarily giving into Timothy's tantrum there. And again, it's what I love about the bar scene. The bar scene is really great, coupled with those flashbacks. And it really does speak to how brutal the industry can be and how you have to be ready for your moment. And it's not an easy thing to be ready for, even if you have all the talent in the world. And clearly Timothy does. And Billy Crudup, man, he is really, really good at giving credence to that in the character.
I loved him in it. Loved him in this movie.
Oh, he's so good. Really, really good. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I do want to speak to something there, because you were just talking, JD, and I'll say this pretty quickly, because this is one of those movies that, even though it sounds like I'm a little bit more mixed on the movie than both of you are. The things about this movie that I do like are frankly more interesting to talk about. And that's why I've been focusing more on these things. The flashback sequences involving the younger versions of these characters, I do think fall flat on their face for me. And primarily, it simply comes down to one thing, or I guess really two things. It's the casting of the younger versions. I did not like Charlie Rowe and I did not like Lewis Partridge as those respective characters because I felt no resemblance to the characters that we were experiencing in the present day. And that did not work for me. I like the idea of these flashbacks. I don't think you remove them. I think they need to be here, but I did not like the casting of them at all. I think that kind of ruins those sequences for me because I felt like I was watching completely different characters that had no connection to what we were seeing in the present day. And that was unfortunate because, like I said, I like the idea of them and I don't think you get rid of them. But the casting failed it for me.
See, that's interesting. I definitely don't share that criticism for sure. Like when you say resemblance, are you talking physical resemblance or emotionally speaking, or both?
All the above. All
All
the
the
above.
above? Okay.
I didn't believe for a second that Charlie Rowe was playing a younger Jay Kelly or that Lewis Partridge was playing a younger Timothy. I just didn't
Gotcha.
buy it.
Yeah, I mean, I think I bought it in the end, especially once we see how that audition scene plays out. I think what we see there from Partridge is indicative of that bitterness we see in Crudup. Now, maybe they play it a little bit differently, but they are also, what, 20, 30, 40 years apart from each other. And perhaps that bitterness will show itself in other ways. And I think what I love about young Jay Kelly here, and maybe this is more of the emotional side of it than anything else, but with Jay throughout so much of this film conflating movies and memory that is fundamental to his arc here, I did find those scenes in the audition scene, as I just talked about. I think the credence he gives to that to the character and why Jay Kelly, the argument that Jay Kelly didn't steal anything, he's great there. But I also think of those moments where he's on set and he's having moments with other actors. And obviously this is older Jay Kelly reflecting, but I think those sequences do speak to some sort of emotional truth as it relates to that overarching idea that Jay Kelly does look at his life through making movies.
I don't-
those
yeah.
are the memories. And emotionally speaking, I very much felt that.
I don't disagree with that. And sorry to keep talking. I want to let you jump in as well, Isaiah. I don't disagree with that because I think those flashback sequences actually do work in vacuums. It's the connectivity to how they relate to the present day Jay Kelly and Timothy that I have a massive problem with. And maybe it's more of an editing thing than it is a performative thing. But when we cut back to them and then we cut back to Jay and Timothy in real time, I just felt like I was seeing like four different characters. But I think in a
Gotcha.
vacuum, those flashback sequences, I think these actors are doing the work to make those sequences in and of themselves work. I think the emotion is earned in those moments individually, but not in the grander scheme of things. That's where it didn't work for me.
Okay. Isaiah,
I
anything?
do. I get where Brendan is coming from. I don't share it, but I do
Mhm.
understand that point of view. I was a little bit more, ironically, I was a little more distracted by just how subtly great the production design and art direction when it comes to the transition into those sequences, whether it was on the train
I
or in
like
other
those.
Yeah,
areas.
that was
I thought
clever.
that was
Yeah.
very beautiful. Mark, I'm hoping I'm not butchering his name. Tiddlesly. His work is fabulous in this film. Very,
Mhm.
very underrated. Very meticulous too. It doesn't cause attention to itself to a point where it's distracting, but it does elevate the scene. I understand that Charlie Rowe and Lewis Partridge, they're not giving like amazing, outstanding performances, but I think I would say they're very serviceable. It's very serviceable in the way how they display and reflect upon the
Okay.
real sequences, and it does even support just how exceptional that bar scene was when you
So
look
good.
at the seeding of the plant of the bitterness and how, but there's also still an appreciation because like Timothy does still affirm that they had something special as friends, and he does still like where Jay Kelly is, but the idea of wanting to be him, that bitterness, maybe even unforgiveness, still like roams around his heart and roams around his mind, and that temptation that he's been carrying for years. Same thing with Jay Kelly. Jay Kelly even acknowledges that, like, yeah, he's a better actor than him, and he gives him his props. But at the end of the day, he just sells it to him straight. Like, you were never going to get it whether I was there or not. And
Yeah.
again, two truths can be clear as one, where, like, yeah, you didn't need to take that audition. You could have just left with him. But at the same time, it just really proves the difference between movie stars and actors, to where there are lots of people out there. I even know people where you just kind of question, why aren't you out there on the big screen?
Sure.
Because yes, they're talented, yes, they have the chops, but there is something, and we got to give movie stars this credit. There's something magnetic that is required that some just don't have. And it's not to
Yeah.
derail, it's not to degrade. This movie is obviously a fan of character actors, and it pays respect to that as well with the industry.
Yeah.
But sometimes with a movie actor and a movie star, like the moment where Timothy just looks at that script, that slight
Yeah.
cut, I was like, yeah, man, like you're not cut out for this. Not
Yeah.
in a way for this specific role.
They are
And I think
different
you have to give
disciplines. You're
respect to
absolutely
that.
right.
Yes, we have to give respect to that. Even if you are someone who leans more towards character acting and like actors, thespian, you still have to pay some type of respect when a movie star, even if not on the same quote unquote caliber, you have to pay some type of respect that they do have something that the industry does need, especially like you said,
Hmm.
Brendan, from a business perspective, because it's still a
Yeah.
business at the end of the day.
Yeah. And I think what's also interesting, you sparked a thought in me, Isaiah, in terms of what we see with Jay early on in this film, or especially in those flashback scenes, because we talked about how he clearly had enough talent. He was big enough for the moment. What's also interesting, just going back to the idea of the movie star and what it takes to be the movie star, we see in one of the flashbacks where he talks about that, the theater professor, whoever that was, asking him about
Yeah.
acting, and he says, I want to be a movie star. So it's clearly there. He has
Yeah.
enough of an ego that that's what he wants, as naive as that may or may not be. But what's also interesting to me about that audition scene is that, for one, he's willing to eat a piece of paper before going into the audition. And I can at least speak to this from a sports perspective. Oftentimes, the superstars on the teams that I played for, they were willing to do crazy ass shit.
Oh yeah, they were
Like
very
superstitious
superstitious.
things.
Yeah.
For sure. So
Lord.
that is 100% believable to me. And then the other thing too is he wasn't even on the list. He forces himself into the room. He's like, I can audition here, right? Like, it takes an egotistical person to be like, I know I'm not on the list, but I can audition, right?
Honestly, yeah. Sometimes the best movie stars are the ones that are the best salesmen.
Like,
They
exactly.
just
He
know how to
just
sell
forces
themselves.
himself into the room and then wins the job. Like,
Yeah.
that is movie star shit, to
It
put it
is. It
bluntly.
absolutely is.
And so I thought that was real interesting. And then too, also, and I know this is a very different note, but again, sparking thoughts as you're talking there, Isaiah, because I agree with you about the production value of this film and editing, the clever tricks to get us into those flashbacks. I do love that it's more sophisticated than just a normal cut. There are ways that Baumbach leads us into those flashbacks that are unique and visually compelling. And then the other thing that he does as well, going back to the phone call scene with Jessica, is that he invokes, I guess, what we could call magical realism, perhaps.
Yeah, it's yeah, I guess it's
and-
internalized magical realism. I
Yes.
guess we can call it.
But where I think that is actually kind of brilliant is that it's not only a clever way to give us two actors having a dialogue in frame, but I think it is actually emotionally vital to that moment because Jay is desperate to be with his daughters and he's failing miserably. So to me, it's this visual metaphor of how close he wants to be to Jessica despite the distance. And also, this whole thing takes place in the woods where he's completely isolated and alone, no one around him, no iota of society is even close to him. So he is literally lost, very literally lost, as well as emotionally disconnected as well. And so that visual image coupled with this desperation to be close to his daughter, and the only way he can manifest that is by inventing it himself mentally. So it's not just this cinematic tool, the cinematic trick that Baumbach does to be opulent from a filmmaking perspective. It certainly is a clever little visual thing, but I think there's more of an emotional and thematic purpose for it than a filmmaking editing thing. So I wanted to highlight that because I do think that is actually one of the more robust tricks that he pulls off here.
Well, there's something old-fashioned about it too, right? Like I mentioned in my opening thoughts, there's almost something kind of Frank Capra-like about this movie, and the way that those flashback sequences or those moments of quote-unquote magical realism are employed and the way they seamlessly blend into them kind of reminds me of an old movie from, let's say, the 1960s or something like that. It does kind of have that old school Hollywood charm in a way. Just the sheer idea of it, I think, is really interesting because I do think that is ultimately what Noah Baumbach is going for here aesthetically. I think he's trying to make what is essentially a golden age of Hollywood movie. I have more thoughts on that later, but I think within those moments of quote unquote magical realism, I think he mostly gets there. I think as far as the emotional side of it between two actors conversing and what that means for each other, in particular, George Clooney and Riley Keough, I think that moment very much works because of what they are bringing to their respective characters.
Yeah, the performances certainly make it work for sure. Yeah. And that's not to say that performatively it couldn't have gotten there. I think of something like Roofman earlier in the year. There's that phone call scene at the end between Channing Tatum and
Kirsten Dunst,
Mary Jane Watson. Yes.
Oh yeah, Mary Jane Watson.
Sorry. I was trying
to
think
Kirsten.
of the...
We know you have a name.
Well, I was trying to think of Mary Jane. That's honestly where my brain was going, much like the Thor joke.
Sure.
So yes, between those two, and they're separated, right? And it's just a shot, reverse shot, essentially. It's what's taking place there. Is the two characters are in separate places, but that is still an emotionally affecting scene. So that's not to say that you can't do it that way. But I do think in this case, because of Jay's desperation to be close to his daughters, I just think it makes a lot of sense to maybe make it visually arresting by employing that trick. But I think more than anything else, emotionally and thematically, it just makes sense to have those two characters in frame having that dialogue. And it certainly makes it more intimate for sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. We're going kind of long here. Do you guys have any other final thoughts on Jay Kelly?
Just to kind of go on, just to spitball a little bit here before I really get to the final thoughts. Nicholas Bertel's score.
I wanted to bring that up. Yep.
Same.
You wanted to talk a little bit about that before I go on, or?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's interesting that you say that because, I watched the movie and I was so caught up in the meta nuances of this film, the Clooney of it all, and the performance that the score, while I did enjoy it in the moment, I honestly didn't think much of it. But I did go back and re-listen to that score prior to this conversation and was honestly kind of blown away by how much I loved it. I think I overlooked how good it is. It's actually really, really fantastic. Honestly, has some of my favorite tracks of the entire year. So, if you miss it in the moment, and understandably, I think you can, because there's a lot going on here. But I do urge people to go back and give it a listen, because Bertel, I mean, he always comes to play. He's one of the best we have, and he absolutely delivers here, more so than I even gave him credit for initially.
Yeah.
It's really, really good.
I didn't miss it in the moment. I didn't like the score at all. It did not work for me. And I love Nicholas Bertel. Actually, this gets into my other problem with the movie, and this is maybe honestly why I felt like, and this is what I said in my opening thoughts, that maybe it seems as though Noah Baumbach trying to create like an old-fashioned movie, he seems a little bit too far out of his comfort zone, to the point that he almost seems a bit confused, because I love how old-fashioned this movie is attempting to go for. I think Nicholas Bertel's score is overly modern to the point that it doesn't fit. And I would say the same thing about Linus Sandgren's cinematography, which I also didn't really care for. Like there's a chase on foot involving a train robbery, I'll simply say, and I was sitting back thinking, why does this look like the opening car chase from No Time to Die? I think there's a modern flair that these individuals have that I just don't think fits what I feel like Baumbach is going for, and I found them very distracting. I think on their own, they probably do sound great. I imagine if I listen to Nicholas Bertel's score on its own, I probably will find it great. I just don't think it works for this movie. And I think it heightens the confusion that I felt like Baumbach was trying to wrestle with, and why I felt like he was maybe a little bit too far out of his comfort zone a bit, which is interesting because I like the editing of this movie and I like the art direction like we talked about earlier. I just think there are other components that don't capitalize on that as well. And I think these are the two things that really honestly failed for me.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of this specific debate really does come down to what you think Baumbach is attempting to do. Yeah. You've noted that quite a bit in this conversation. You felt like Baumbach was trying to harken back to a different era of filmmaking. I did not get that from Baumbach. That was never
interesting. Yeah.
Never something I gathered. So that makes sense as to why the score, the cinematography certainly did not bother me in that way. The score for me was just not something I paid attention to. I was way too caught up in the emotional mechanics of the film, the performances, the meta layers, as I noted. I wasn't anti Bertel's score. It just didn't register with me as much until
like
I went
you just
back
didn't notice it. You were
listen.
focusing on other things. Yeah, I get
exactly. Honestly, maybe same thing with the cinematography. I will admit, I don't think that it's Sandron's best work by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think it's terrible, but it's just something that's just there. Like for me, I think where the cinematography is at its best is when it's complementing the editing and the production design and those clever tricks
I
that we were
agree.
talking
I
about.
agree. Yeah.
Like that to me is where the cinematography is at its best. But mostly I think it's fine. It might be operating somewhat plainly, but like I don't think it's distracting from the main thing, if you will. And the main thing for me was never Baumbach trying to invoke classic Hollywood or this different type of filmmaking as you've tried to, or as you have been articulating.
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
never my thing.
I very much felt that. That's interesting that you had a different experience with that.
Yeah. So I do think, like, as you were talking about it there, I was like, that's it. That's 100%.
That is the disconnect. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Sorry to take us down that rabbit hole, Isaiah.
No, it's all good. I love
if you had more
the
thoughts.
conversation. But I agree that I had some minor gripes with the cinematography at first, but it got way better as the film went along. So I do see Brendan's point of view. As far as final thoughts, there were a few things that I wanted to kind of get off my chest. The running sequences in this film, I think, are much more riveting than I was fearing. Because the first one, essentially, when he's chasing the thief from the train, I love just like how realistic it feels. Like you have this 60-year-old man who's genuinely trying to like catch up with this guy, and he's kind of like in his moment. It's like a moment for him, like he's in a scene himself, and everybody's cheering him on. It's very like kind of corny in a sense, but it's really the payoff that makes that sequence fabulous. Is when he figures out that the guy that he caught, and he feels like this glorious moment, is schizophrenic, but everybody else is kind of thinking, oh wow, like you're this hero. I love that with Jake Kelly in this film. His punishment is not he gets canceled or he loses his status. His punishment is he's adored by so many people and he cannot be seen as like this bad guy, but he has to wrestle with the idea of you know the truth. You know how
Yeah.
problematic you are. You know
Yeah.
how selfish you can be. You know that you can miss the mark. Even the sequence where we're thinking, oh my God, like in the dinner table, he's about to get canceled. But it was kind of a sigh of relief of like it's showing him being a savior rather than beating this guy up that, to be fair, did attack him first, but still, it's like he can't lose in the limelight. And some people may think that that's a
Hmm.
great thing. Here, it's kind of a curse, and it
Yeah.
reminds me so much of like whether you believe or not, this passage that I was taught growing up from biblical texts. Like, what does it mean to gain the world but ultimately lose your soul? And I'm not saying that he necessarily like sells his soul like in a wicked, horrible way, but
Yeah.
he gains so much towards the end but loses. And
Yeah.
finally, for the second running sequence, and this is where I really found the film to be somewhat cathartic despite my young age, is that we haven't really talked much about his father and how there's a very complicated relationship with his father. He wants his father to be involved in his life. And his father's really the only character that he doesn't push away because of his own faults. It's more so that he has to carry that generational pain and trauma of just not being invested and hearing how his father speaks about him and talks about him in such a belittling way, despite
Hmm.
him making it, quote unquote, making it and being snobbish. He's just comes a certain scene in the film where he's asking his dad, he's trying to get his dad to like be a part of his life again, and the dad just drives off. And at first
Yeah.
he's just like, like, come on, dad, come on, like let's come on, just come with me. And he keeps running and running and
Yeah.
running. And there's a certain shot that I think is one of the best shots of the year. It's where he's just literally running after his father because try not to get too emotional about this because reminds me of the conversation my father had with me when he remembers when he was 7 years old, when he was like 7 or 8 years old, or in the elementary age, where he was running after his father. And it wasn't until later on in life where he regained that relationship. And
Mm.
in the scene where something was wrong with his father was like sick. Luckily, his father survived. Unfortunately for me, that didn't happen. When my dad found his father, it was too late.
Mm.
And that scene and moment was instantly the moment where I'm like, this is what takes it from this grade of a star rating to this one as one of the better films of the year. I can't promise or
Okay.
guarantee that it's going to make my top 10, but Jay Kelly is a problematic and at times narcissistic character who didn't ask to be this way, but he accepts it. And he didn't ask for his father to be the person that he is, that ultimately reflects on the